A lot of people have soured on Black Ops 3 in recent months, saying that the game is stale and repetitive with not much to offer. On the other hand, Halo 5 has had increasing player counts for the past few months, culminating with the news that this past month had the highest amount of active monthly players since Halo 3. The trend in games is almost always downward from launch, as you get the biggest player population when the game first comes out, and then it fizzles due to people completing the game and moving on, or just getting tired of the monotony of playing a game for such a long period of time. There are some exceptions to this rule, like CSGO, Dota 2, and Evolve, which we'll get to later. So, how come Halo 5 is bucking the trend in the opposite direction of 99% of the games? The decision to make all of Halo 5's DLC releases free versus previous entries in the franchise, which featured paid DLC and season passes, ultimately fractured the player base, and 343 wanted to avoid this situation. When Halo 5 was released, however, many people, myself included, felt that it lacked lots of content when it was launched. Part of this, I feel, was 343 making sure that the gameplay mechanics and functionality were as flawless as possible after the Halo Master Chief Collection disaster, thus left them little time to fill the game with the amount of content that most people would expect in a Halo game. No Forge, no social playlists, minimal customization options, a tiny sliver of the standard game modes, a handful of maps. Yeah, it was pretty bare bones. However, I'd rather the game work properly than to have tons of different beepity-bops to mess around with in a game that doesn't function, like my experience with Black Ops 2 or even the launch of Battlefield 4. But is this mentality of drip-feeding content after launch a good thing or a bad thing? We know from experience that games will ebb, sometimes significantly, after the launch of a game. With so many people now binge-playing games and always wanting to know everything about a game even before it launches, it gets harder and harder to satisfy the instant gratification society that we now find ourselves a part of. Games like Titanfall, Battlefield Hardline, and Battlefront failed ultimately because there wasn't enough content to keep people invested in the game in spite of the fact that these games function very well. The most important part of a game's lifespan is at the beginning, and if players tire of your game early, most will abandon it without reason to come back. And once people leave, it's usually for good, since people will sell back physical copies to the store or send them back to GameFly never to see it again, even though more people are actually purchasing games digitally in this day and age, so there isn't really that option to return. But let's take a gander at some examples here. For Titanfall, it wasn't until the 1 year mark when all of the DLC was given away for free that the game saw an uptick in player population. The same goes for Battlefield Hardline, with recently giving away all of the DLCs in the lead up to Battlefield 1 and dropping content in different patches like new guns, new gadgets, and even some new maps. As I alluded to earlier, Evolve went free to play after tons of controversy with its DLC and microtransaction model. Do you guys see a trend here? Let's go back to Halo 5 and the idea of free DLC being drip-fed into the game, and it has paid off with higher player counts now than when the game actually launched. Additionally, they hosted a free play week, which allowed players to try their game and ultimately purchase it for half price. Sorry I'm late on this news if you wanted to try Halo 5, but I did mention it during my live stream when I actually found out about it myself. Since launch, they've added tons of new weapons and vehicles and rec packs. Game modes like Griffball, Big Team Battle Infection, and even a PvE game mode that you're watching in the background called Warzone Firefight, Forge, and Forge maps into the arena rotation, as well as tons of new maps in both arena and Warzone. I mean, look at all of this content that they've added in just recently. Giving fans content for free shows not only that you, as developers, are working fiercely on making your game better, but it adds longevity to the game by having variety in it. You contrast this with Black Ops 3, which has fractured the player base with paid DLC content and season passes, and even further disenfranchising players by putting new content in a random loot generator with no guarantee of getting these items, and by only adding one new map. Well, really, it wasn't new, it was just only available if you pre-ordered the game, and a brand new game mode which just came out recently. Oh, and who could forget features that were never asked for, like groups and music tracks, which are meaningless at this point into a game's life cycle that only lasts 1 year because of the game's game's development cycle. The numbers don't lie. The content model for Halo 5 is triumphant over the way that Black Ops 3 and other AAA titles have been conditioned to think is business as usual. Halo 5's microtransaction system called Rec Packs has generated tons of revenue for Microsoft. The Halo World Championship esports event had a grand prize which is supplemented by Rec Pack sales. By November 4th, Rec Pack proceeds had added $500,000 to the pool, which then climbed to $700,000 by the middle of November. In early December, Microsoft announced a $2 million prize pool, and by February 19th, a couple of weeks before the event actually took place, the total prize pool exceeded $2.5 million, all supplemented by microtransactions. That's some serious fucking cash, and even though the publishers will take a hit in the loss of revenue from things like map packs and season passes, when you have more players playing your game for a longer duration of time, the more of these microtransactions will happen more often, and thus developers will probably make even more money in the long run. Not to mention, your game will generate more interest in other avenues since there's more people playing it. With Titanfall 2 announcing free DLC to all players as to not fracture the fan base, I hope that other developers and publishers will take notice. Halo 5's content model is one to be replicated because not only is it consumer friendly by not segregating the player population and increasing the longevity for the product you purchase, but it also helps out those making the game by giving it additional buzz and enticing players to make more purchases of microtransactions since you're playing the game longer, which add to the revenue stream. Are you guys still playing Black Ops 3? How many of you are playing Halo 5? How about some of these other games that I've mentioned? I still play both Black Ops 3 and Halo 5, but I find myself playing tons of different games at the moment, including Battlefield Hardline, now that I've gotten the DLC that I never purchased when the game first came out. However, having new things to do in Halo 5 makes it easier to decide to play that game instead of grinding out Black Ops 3 for those stupid-ass contracts. What do you guys think? I've been The Schwantz27, out like Amari. Until next time.